Curiosity versus assumption.
Curiosity versus assumptions.
We are, in a way, challenging our own evolution.
Our ego's already working on it.
Put it in this big ball of assumption.
We fill in the gaps all the time.
And it says, no, hold on.
And place it in our current experience. Hello and welcome to another episode of Truth Be Told. We are so glad that you're here. So this week we're talking about curiosity versus assumption. And so this whole month we've been talking about the building blocks of true authenticity and connection. So we've talked about vulnerability, we've talked about the importance of belonging, we've talked about listening, we've talked about empathy. And so this week we're talking about curiosity. We're kind of putting a bow on this month. And so curiosity, when we live from this space, when we live from the space of a beginner's mind, when we live from the space of always stepping into new and greater ways of being, then things open up for us. And so we're going to talk about tonight the challenge that comes with this idea of curiosity, the opportunity, and how we can actually apply this spiritual superpower to our lives. So sit back and relax. Enjoy another episode of Truth Be Told. Curiosity versus assumption. So I recently went to the Museum of Life and Science near my house with my 2-year-old nephew. And it was absolutely amazing how he interacted not only with everyone around him, but all of the exhibits and the things to play on. He exuded this idea of curiosity. So it got me thinking. So curiosity is this approach to life, and it comes from this kind of understanding of what the Zen Buddhists would call the beginner's mind. So when we approach life with this curiosity, it creates this space, this opening for us to experience things in new and exciting ways. So when we approach the same sort of situations with assumptions, we are going on our past understanding of how things went when we had similar interactions, or we went to similar places or had similar experiences. And so we take all of the information that we've learned from those experiences and we put it in this big ball of assumption and place it in our current experience. Now, assumptions aren't always bad. There's some things that are good. You know, when we assume that when we flick on a light switch that, you know, the electricity is going to work and we're going to be able to see. So those little assumptions, those aren't always bad, but when we constantly live from the space of just making assumptions, then we begin to create this kind of rut. And when we do that, we close ourselves off to the power of this curiosity, this power of this beginner's mind. And just like my nephew experienced this place that he had never been to, like it was the most amazing thing in the world. And he went from place to place to place and more excitement and just enjoying every little thing in the moment. And so I had been to this place many times, but I began to try to see it through his eyes. And it's amazing when we approach it with this beginner's mind, we approach it with curiosity, when we approach life to what does life have to offer, and it just creates this expansion of our awareness. And curiosity can be one of our biggest superpowers in the fact that it can really inform how we show up in the world. And so the challenge is when we have experiences, when we have things that trigger us, when we have things that show up in our experience, the challenge is to get really curious. And like I always ask myself, I wonder what that's about. And so then the challenge becomes living in this space of curiosity, which sometimes can be uncomfortable, because when we're curious and we step into new situations and we're curious about maybe pushing our boundaries in certain areas, it's a little bit risky, it's a little bit vulnerable. And we've talked about vulnerability this month. But in order to really cultivate this larger idea of authenticity, to cultivate this larger idea of this deep connection, then curiosity is one of the integral pieces. And so when we live from that space, it opens the world up to new and amazing things. And then we can show up in life in ways that we never experienced. But the challenge is to ask the question, I wonder what that's about.
Yeah. I love that whole thing about you just take all them assumptions up into this giant ball and just try and just shove it into whatever's in front of you. Yeah. That kind of hit a little bit.
I do that all the time. I do it with people and I do it with situations. I mean, every time I wouldn't say every time, I'm learning. But the default is to be like, oh, I know what this person's done before and I know it's going to happen again. And then there's no space for anything else to get in.
Yeah.
And so, or the same sort of scenario, I've been there, done that. I know exactly what's going to happen. So there's no space for anything else to get in. Yeah. And so it's like really being curious about, okay, what's that about? Which I ask myself that about 1 million times a day. And then dealing with that part. And then now, creating a little bit more space for curiosity, a little bit more space for people to show up differently, for me to show up differently, for situations to transpire in a different manner.
Well, isn't that the interesting part about it too? Like when we know exactly how it's going to go, we don't leave any room for it to go any other way. So that is most of the time exactly what happens. Like we're going to get exactly what we think is going to happen because we are convinced that that's what's going to happen.
This science of mind stuff works, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Whether you like it or not.
Exactly. Yeah. It's fascinating. I find it just fascinating how even within this teaching, somehow it's surprising when we make an assumption like that, where a past experience it's gone this way, or even past experiences with people other than who we're talking to right now. Well, in the past, this has happened over and over and over again. So it's set this idea in our mind that talking to someone currently is being informed now by all of these past experiences that may not even have been that person. And we're so convinced it's going to go the same way that it does, because we act in the way that we acted before, so that this now happens that way. And we're also sending out this message and this energy and this vibe that's like, you also need to act this way based on how I'm acting. And all of these invisible things move behind the scenes to get that exact scenario to happen again.
Yeah.
And we're surprised.
I was going to wonder, like along that same lines, how often is it that assumption that we make that, somebody's going to act a certain way, that we are so blinded that when they show up and actually act a different way in our mind, it still seemed like they acted that way. And we leave that situation thinking that's exactly how it was, when how many times maybe have I been like completely wrong about that and walked away with one thing in my mind. And if I would discuss it with somebody later and find out like, that's not at all how it happened, because, our assumptions that certainly shape the way that we really think it is.
Well, and it's interesting. I think assumptions, we do it when we don't want to do the vulnerability piece, or at least I do, but I'm sure I'm not the only one. But if I don't want to go in this vulnerability piece, if I don't want to really show up authentically, and I don't want to really leave space for other people to do that, then I'm going to make assumptions. That way I don't even have to go there. So then we bypass this idea of vulnerability, which then we bypass true connection, and we just live on assumptions because we think it's safer. So if we live on our assumptions, we know how it's going to go, we know how it's going to play out, and that feels really comfortable. Yeah. And so instead of this idea of curiosity, which may require us to sit, and we talked about this before, sit in the discomfort just a little bit, because we don't have the next step in front of us. And so it's being okay with not having the next step in front of us. And I think that that's part of this whole thing that we've been talking about: authenticity, vulnerability, all those things. That curiosity is really kind of this another way of saying sitting in the discomfort a little bit and not always having to know how things are going to turn out, which is very uncomfortable, especially for someone like me who likes to know everything and likes to know the back and for everything else.
Yeah. Well, it's been fascinating to just kind of even reflect on it myself, preparing for this, of how much, like, there's assumption that is conscious, conscious thoughts that we're having that lead us to assumptions. But then there's also like unconscious thought processes that create assumptions. And it's been really interesting to view in myself, in others, just in conversation, how much of our regular conversation is based in unconscious assumptions, like assumptions that we're making because of patterns and habits and just because of how life has shown up, that we don't even recognize that we're necessarily doing. And most of the time it is about other people's behavior, about how we think they're going to behave and show up, or how they, that whole wormhole of can of worms or whatever. It's pretty fascinating. It's pretty fascinating to kind of witness, like, it's one of those things where once you put your focus on it, all of a sudden it's everywhere.
Right.
Yeah. Assumptions versus curiosity. I know I say this every week, but I think this is probably our most important topic this month. If for no other reason, then I think it shows up more often, by far more often, than any of the other topics we've covered so far. And that is because, as we heard in the challenge, our brain does not like ambiguity. And so we fill in the gaps all the time. We fill in the gaps of the things that show up in front of us, where we have pieces of things. Our brain wants to make sense of the whole picture. And so it fills in the gaps of the pieces that we don't know. And a lot of times, this shows up as making assumptions. We draw conclusions based on what's in front of us, based on past experience, based on a whole slew of things. We draw conclusions to fill in those gaps. And those gaps show up as making assumptions, us making assumptions about ourselves, about other people, about other people's experience. It shows up all over the place. Our opportunity this week is to mind the gap. Be mindful of where we are filling in those gaps, because the opposite of assumptions, at least what we're calling the opposite this week, the opposite of assumption is curiosity. And when we lead with curiosity, instead of finding our own conclusion to fill in that gap, if we ask questions, if we remain curious, if we continue to observe and not fill in that gap immediately, once again, maybe we're talking about sitting in a little bit of discomfort, the discomfort of our mind not always knowing, not always being able to draw conclusions right away. If we sit in that moment, if we mind that gap and remain curious, then all of a sudden we actually have a different interpretation of the world around us, and perhaps a more accurate interpretation of the world around us. So the opportunity this week actually is pretty simple. It's simply to mind that gap. Now, our brains are wired in a way for this, so it might be a little challenging to do that on a regular basis, but as often as possible to be mindful of where we are making these assumptions about things that we think we might know. I think we can also take this opportunity a step deeper, the opportunity to build deeper and more authentic connections with other people begins with this idea of curiosity. We are, in a way, challenging our own evolution, the way we have evolved as a safety mechanism. We have evolved to have this system that does want to fill in those gaps. So that deeper opportunity this week is to recognize where evolution has brought us, and to recognize that the discomfort is not necessarily real. It is a perceived discomfort based on this mechanism that we have evolved into. And so as we continue evolving, part of our evolution, I believe, is going to be evolving past that default safety mechanism, the fight or flight mechanism that we have had for a really long time. And for now, that has to be a conscious decision. For now, being conscious of how we respond to things, being conscious of not filling in the gaps, being conscious of being curious in order to build deeper relationships, rather than making assumptions, which actually tends to shut us off from deepening relationships. So the opportunity this week, mind the gap and intentionally decide to remain curious as often as possible.
Well, there it is again, that damn discomfort.
I know. Every week.
Man. I'm beginning to realize that that's like, oh, Jesus Christ. Yeah, I like that idea of minding the gap. Yeah, because your brain wants to do that. We want to I think what I do is I get certain this kind of fragmented information, and then I create a story. And so creating a story is basically the same thing as assumption, because we're assuming something to be true that we don't know necessarily it is. So I create this big story, and then I get myself all worked up, all worked up and whatever. And then as things play out, I realize, oh my God, I've wasted 2,578 minutes today living from this story, and none of it was true. And it's man, if I could just sit in the discomfort just for a moment and allow things their natural course, then I could have saved myself an entire day and probably not eaten a whole box full of goldfish. It's God, I'm beginning to think that one of the greatest spiritual tools that we can use is sitting in the discomfort. It seems like if we can do that for a period of time and be okay with it, it seems like that would probably pretty much kind of solve half the issues that we create for ourselves.
Yeah.
Superpower.
Just want to put this comment up here for a minute, because I didn't exactly think of it in that way, but this is brilliant. Yeah, we fill in the gap because then we don't have to be afraid about falling in. If there's a gap, it's oh God, what happens if we don't fill the gap in? Oh no.
Yeah.
There's so much magic in the gap. When you hear about gap meditation, of just being aware of the space in between your thoughts and trying to expand that space, that's the key in. And it's amazing because then you see your mind at work when you're trying to extend the space of that gap, how your mind is, oh no, we're not going to go there. We're going to just talk. Yeah, and the exact same thing with interactions with people.
Well, and Dan, you said, it's right that this is the way our brains are wired. It is our brains don't like ambiguity, which we know. So it tries to create a story, and then our brains reward us with certain chemicals based on when we can complete that story. And then the more we do that, that feels good. So let's complete that story a little bit more, whether it's based in truth or not.
Yeah.
And so we may not be able to completely erase our brain's mechanism and how it works and how it stores memory and things of that nature. But I think in being mindful of this is just my brain doing what it does.
Yeah. Let's
give it a moment.
Yeah.
Then, okay, now we can let our brain have its fun for a minute. And then now we can step into a space that's more intentional, and a space that is okay with discomfort, and realizing that no one's died because they sat in just for a few moments in the space of spiritual discomfort. And just to allow that.
Well, and I think what's interesting about that is, I know I said it in the video, but this idea that we are challenging our own evolution, and not that we're challenging how we evolved, but challenging where we are at in evolution. That we are, I'm going to come out and say that I think we are at a place in time where we are desiring to be further along in our evolution than it seems like we are.
Mm.
I don't know that it is totally true that we actually are. We might actually be further along in our evolution than we think we are. But it certainly feels like a lot of the time that we want to be further along than we think we are.
Mm-hmm.
Follow me on that? Like,
Yes, I have you. I got you.
yeah, right. We think we need to be further along than we really are. But in actuality, I think we really are in that place that we think we need to be. It's just we haven't grown like some other, mysterious limb or something to help us listen better, or like, some other brain function to have us. We don't have like telescopes or satellite dishes coming out of our heads or right. But the reason I say that is because I think if we were to go 100 years in the future and look back on where we are all at now, I think what we're going to find is we're moving through a phase, and this is probably over the last 100 years or so that we've been moving through this phase, but human evolution where for the longest time, we needed to trust our instincts. And so decisions were made based on how things made us feel. And if something was a threat, we felt threatened. And that was good. We're at a place in time where most of us are feeling threats of things that are not actually threats to our physical being.
Right.
And so there has been this evolution of logic and reasoning, and as we think through things, we're now able to rationalize our way through things and perceive life not based on how it makes us feel, but based on evidence and logic and reasoning. And so I think that there's going to be this shift towards this logic brain, reason brain, rational brain that wants to not jump to conclusions about things, right? And I'm not saying that logic and reason hasn't been around for a long time, but our brain's instinct to go there first, I think, is what's going to be evolving. Yeah. Are we only making decisions based out of what we feel? Or are we also basing decisions based out of what we know? So I'll let you know in 100 years what that looks like. but I think that's what we're really talking about.
And it's a balance of those things. I think that those things can be used in a way. And I think it's tipped a little bit because we feel a certain way and then we react from that space instead of like, okay, allowing our feelings and how it shows up in our bodies, allowing it to be a kind of a tool or an arrow pointing like, look at this. I'm feeling this in my body. Okay, what's that about? Ask the question, what's underneath this? And then it's kind of pointing our logic or our reasoning brain to like, oh, it's this. Yeah. And then when we can look at that, then this kind of physiological aspect of our being kind of will follow suit.
It's so almost like
it's an arrow. Like, go this way.
Yeah. It's almost like if all of the parts of our brain could talk to each other regularly, like on its own, without us having to convince it.
I don't know that I'd want someone in my brain necessarily.
Well,
knowing all of that.
Yeah, right.
Got people going on.
Okay, yeah, no, cool. I wasn't sure if you were going to say something or not.
Yeah, I know. I see that. So now, since I have the opportunity, I'm going to jump in there for sure. Yeah. So, when you were talking about, you think that like we're actually evolved further than we seem to be like right now. I know absolutely, without a doubt. As we learn in the science of mind, that if we look at our snapshot of right now, it's not a picture of what we're thinking right now. It's a picture of what we've been thinking and all the time that's led up to now. So what we're thinking, what we're creating now, we're not going to see for a little while. And so us talking about this right now is part of the work that we've done a year ago. And what we're doing right now is going to manifest in another year.
Yeah.
So yeah, we are further along than we seem to be.
Yeah.
I'm sure of that.
Yeah. We'll just see it later. That's true. Yeah.
I'm going to take your word for it, Chris. Because you know stuff.
He does. He's a smart dude.
Yeah.
Well, thank you all so much for being here. We are definitely not done yet, but just wanted to take a moment to let you know how much we appreciate you kind of playing with us and watching with us. We have undoubtedly the best job in the world. We have fun literally all week long, the three of us, and all week long with you. And so we have a lot of opportunity for you to jump in here with us. We have a website with a plethora of opportunity for you to jump in. We have evergreen educational videos, series, and stuff that you can, calling it educational sounds so lame. We have really cool videos on our website for you to check out at your own leisure. They also tend to be informative and educational, which is also cool. So work through that at your own pace if you want to. Come check out Tuesday nights. Obviously, we do Truth Be Told, this video, every Tuesday night. Wednesday, we have meditations with Chris, Unwind Wednesday, which is pretty awesome. And Thursday, we get to come together online in what we call the gathering, which is where we take the topic of the week that we talk about here in this video, and we get to jump into some deep conversation together. It's a place where we can intersect our crossroads of our personal journey with community and begin to introduce our spiritual journey to conversation and see what other people are up to and begin to learn what that looks like when we come together and start that conversation. So definitely check out all of that really cool stuff. Of course, like and follow and share and all of the good social media stuff while you're online. Our Facebook page, our YouTube page, Instagram, wherever you are at, wherever you see us, we always appreciate a good like, a comment, and a share. Check out our email list on the website. You can sign up, and we're always we're sending out regular updates about what we got going on. And really big news to come. We are working on another live event, weekly event. For large groups to come together. So keep an eye out for that. That should be up soon. And so let's jump back into the show.
We're talking about curiosity versus assumptions. And we're talking about that in the context of the monthly theme, which is the building blocks of authentic connection, which is what we're really striving for. As we explore these ideas, it's all about communal evolution, and this is how we move forward as the human race, is learning better skills to communicate with one another and to form deeper bonds that make it all worthwhile. So how this comes up with curiosity and assumption. For me, I'm going to speak mostly from personal experience here. So what happens when we're in a conversation is it goes back to our week one of vulnerability. We're in a conversation, somebody says something and we're not exactly clear on what they mean, or there's maybe a little more information that would, bring some more clarity to the conversation. And right as that idea pops into our head, that question that we're going to ask, our egos are already working on it, and it says, no, hold on. I know exactly what it is, and it gives us that assumption that says it's probably this. Don't ask that question. You're going to look foolish. Stay small. It's okay. Just let the conversation in. And that's just really a boring fizzle out way that the conversation ends and we don't move towards that deeper connection that was the opportunity there that we just missed. So what the tool of this week is, it's your hands. But I'm going to do imaginary hands, so we'll hide them behind ourselves. 2 imaginary hands. And next time you're in a conversation and you can use a little more clarity or even just broader context, whatever it is that's going to make the story a little more rich to you, and that idea pops in your head, I want you, when you think that you maybe know the answer, your ego or your thinking mind is already making that assumption and asking you to play small, I want you to take your imaginary hands and gently push yourself forward into a new direction and say, whatever that question is. A lot of times we feel like it's a stupid question, or we're going to look like we don't know everything. Heaven forbid somebody finds out that I don't know the answers to everything that exists. It's okay to put yourself out there a little bit, to create a moment where you are showing your authenticity, you're showing your vulnerability, we're opening up with empathy, we are working to create a bond of, true belonging, and we're listening instead of just hearing. These are all the weekly themes, and it all ties into this week of curiosity, being genuinely curious about those around us, about the world around us. We need to ask the deeper questions in order to figure out how it works and how we can help it work better. There's always room for improvement in everything. And so here's the thing, like our ego has that fear of, well, if I say that and I look foolish, everybody's going to make fun of me, I will be ridiculed, people will lose respect for me. None of that's true. It's always about individuals. Nobody's really walking around reminding themselves of the person that asked a silly question. What people do remember is when somebody tries to genuinely make a deeper connection, to ask or learn a little bit more about ourselves, about the one that we're talking with. People will remember that intention and desire to create a better connection. And that's important. That's truly how we show people that they're valuable. We remind ourselves that we're valuable. And when we do this, we learn better and better skills to communicate with one another, which is how we can sit down at the table when it comes time to have a difficult conversation, because we've already laid the groundwork of getting beyond our comfort zone in order to more deeply connect with one another. We do it with those around us first, and then we learn the skills of how to do it with those in broader circles, especially circles that maybe we don't see eye to eye on everything. That's where we're moving as a society, as the evolution of the human race. If we want to truly create a world that works for everyone, this is what we have to do. So, with imaginary hands, give yourself a gentle push next time you're falling back into assumptions or back into the idea of playing small.
Gentle push. I like that.
Yeah, it's good.
Sometimes I think I need more than a gentle push.
Oh.
I'm just saying, I like how you said it nicely.
The gentle
push. Non-violent, and I appreciate that. But there's sometimes I'm like, Lord, I just need someone like to just come and just push me forward. It's interesting when you talked about it really pricked something in me, so I knew it was something I needed to work on because I felt it. I felt the little prickly feeling.
So let's do it here publicly. Why not?
Yeah, why not? This whole idea that yeah, why not? This whole idea that we have to know everything, and so I do one of two things. One, I just won't. If I know that I am afraid of like saying something that I may not exactly know about, then I just won't say anything at all. So I really recognize that shrinking. Or I go on the complete opposite end and I'm so stuck in my assumptions of how things are supposed to go that I will bulldoze the conversation with whatever I know to be true. And it's going to be true. I don't care what you say. This is the truth. And so then I have this kind of how can I say it? I catch myself this kind of passive condescension sort of feeling. But it's all from the same space. It's from the same space of being afraid that I'm going to show up in a way that is that I'm going to look stupid or I'm going to look whatever. And if you say something with enough confidence, anyone's going to believe, so it's like this overcompensation. And so I think that it all ties back to this idea of curiosity, of it being okay not to know everything. I mean, and actually it's probably better that you don't know everything, because then you're truly able to kind of be fluid in the moment as things come and to, I don't know, experience life in this whole really flexible sort of dancey sort of way, instead of like this regimen and it has to be this way and this is the way it's going to be. It's the way it's always been. And the energy of that is really squidgy. And so the energy of just like saying, hey, you know what? This is what I know, but I'm open to like learning more about it. Even if you don't say it verbally, to have that kind of energy about it. So I really appreciate that. And I trust that you guys will give me the gentle nudge when I need it.
Yes, of course. I like, first I'll just need to say, I like how squidgy has become so commonly used in our conversation that it has made it into the video. Yes. Number one. And number two, listening to you say all that, I was like in my head, I'm like back in 5th grade, like in the desk, sitting behind my desk. The question is asked and it's like, oh God, everyone else knows the answer, but I don't. They have to. And it's like, oh well, why am I the only one who doesn't know the answer? And it's like they don't know. And looking back on it, it's like, oh yeah, but they were the kids who made the assumption that of course they know the answer, that their hand goes up before the question's even finished, right? And it's just like the assumptions that get made, the gaps we fill in all over the place that we're just conditioned for. Whoa.
I was one of those kids, by the way, just so you know. One of the annoying kids.
Yeah. And I can easily be either one of those at any given moment. Yeah.
How often too, like, do we speak up when we decide, like, you know what, I need to know this and I'm going to ask, and then you do, and then afterwards somebody like kind of pulls you aside and like, thank you, I needed that.
Nobody knew.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
I love the idea again of just that leading with that curiosity, just opening up again to like, let's see what's out there. Like, I want to learn more, and it's okay to admit I don't know everything because I really want to experience it. Kind of like going back to Reverend Ryan's segment, the 2-year-old walking into the place with eyes full of wonder. Like, that's what life should be. It's all a mystery. And it's doing the research for this week, I stumbled against, again, among the quote, and I forget who said it, but it was like, you don't get to be bored. Oh, I know who it was. And it's kind of unfortunate, but it was Louis C.K. But it was like, you don't get to be bored. Like, there's too much going on here. Like, it kills me. Like, I'm never bored, because anytime that I am bored, then I sit and think, and then it's like people are like, come on, let's go. I'm like, what? We just got here. Never bored. It's too much.
Yeah. Yeah. So I have this thought that I'm almost scared to bring up, but we're gonna go there.
I see the smoke coming in.
Yeah. So to take this conversation about assumptions a step further, well, I guess first, what I think is really interesting is that the challenge this week and the opportunity this week are both the same thing, right? It's to remain curious. So like, this whole thing is really about curiosity. And I find it really interesting how easy it is, at least in my experience, in this teaching, in New Thought teachings, it is really easy to replace old assumptions with new assumptions and feel like, oh, well, now we're spiritual. Now we're on the yoga mat. Now we're now we're in that new, and we just replace this old role, this old story, this old whatever with this new one. I'm going to be nice about it. And I'll just say, I think we're also evolving there. I think we're also evolving in this place of how science of mind was practiced 60 years ago, how it was practiced 30 years ago, and how it's being asked of us to be practiced today. And it's fascinating to see how often, because I think we tend to have this like self-righteousness within New Thought ideas, that we have some sort of answer that is better than whatever sort of answer we had before that. But if we're making those answers based on assumptions, it's really not any different. And so I'm not exactly sure where this conversation goes, but I just feel like we wouldn't really be talking this conversation to the fullest extent of what we kind of owe. like based on who we are and the conversations that we have, I think we owe this part of the conversation to everybody else too. Like, if we're just replacing old assumptions with new assumptions, but calling them better because they're assumptions made within the realm of New Thought, are we really doing anything different? Maybe. But to practice, like, what would it look like to practice science of mind principles from a place of curiosity on a regular basis, rather than science of mind principles from assumption? Now, it might be easy to say, well, we should assume that science of mind is going to work, that principles are going to be, it's like, so there is, I suppose, if you're aware of principles, and principles work 100% of the time. there is the expectation.
What you're saying like really resonates with me, and it's something else that came up during my research for this week. And it was kind of like the levels of information and education. Like when you start learning a new thing, like getting into a new philosophy, maybe like science of mind or whatever, learning more about something, right away, like your mind is lit up and it's taking in this new information and it feels pretty good. And you feel like you know it all. And so you're going to start telling other people what it is, even people that know 100 times more than you. You're going to tell them what it is. And then you start to learn more. And then you get to a point where you know a decent amount. Now you know enough to realize you don't know squat, because you're like, oh my God, there's all that more. Oh, okay. And so that's what resonated with me when you were talking about that. It came up for me this week. Like that's one of the things that we do. We learn a little bit and we just make these assumptions all over the place. And if we keep learning and keep being curious, then we realize we didn't know anything and we got a lot more to learn.
And it's interesting. I think assumptions, like within the context of science of mind or within the context of any sort of philosophy, when we operate from assumptions, whether they're past assumptions, current assumptions, assumptions in general, we know that some assumptions cut us off.
Yeah.
They just cut us off from anything. So I think there's a difference between, and so this idea of like knowing the truth, or we talk about this a lot. And so I think knowing has this evolutionary energy to it. So assumptions has like, this is it, this is what it's going to be, this is what we're doing, this is how we're doing it, and this is what it's going to look like. But this knowing is this, just how we say we know that there's one thing going on. There's one thing back of all things. And so we're not making an assumption. We're knowing this to be true, but this knowing has this, it has a lot of wiggle room. It has a lot of room to grow and breathe and inhale and exhale. And so I think that if we can set an intention to practice science of mind or any other spiritual philosophy, we're talking about science of mind, from a space of knowing, then it creates this openness. Because every day is an opportunity to participate in the knowing. Every day is an opportunity to increase the knowing and to up-level the knowing. And so it has this sort of, what I know today is not the same thing I'll know tomorrow because I haven't lived tomorrow yet. Yeah. And so I think that as we continue to apply these principles in an ever-changing world, so not trying to apply principles with this idea that this is how it is, this is how it was done 50 years ago, and that's going to work for the end of time. Well, that's not true. We have to move and we have to continue to up-level our experience based on what we know. And we as a collective global we. And I think that that's changing each and every day. And so then that calls us into this more fluid understanding, this sort of knowing that creates action. It doesn't create this, the assumptions I think create this dogma that, okay, this is it. You got to believe this, and that's not something that we want to dip our toe in. We want to, I don't know, it just has this different energy about it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think what's really important about that too is understanding the difference between knowing with a capital K and knowing with a lowercase k. Yeah. Knowing, like there is a knowing. It's not about what we know, right? But there is a certain amount of information that we know that we have to be knowledgeable about in order to kind of make space for that knowing, the capital, big K knowing, and that makes a really big difference. And so another part that's coming up for me in this is the idea of being humble, which may be a new term for most religious scientists, just being humble in that curiosity and like understanding that even if we do lowercase know something and we lowercase know that this is how it's gone in the past, or even uppercase know that treatment works. When we apply affirmative prayer, yes, it's going to work, but let's not lowercase know that it's going to work in a specific way.
Yeah.
And I think that's really like surrendering to that idea. Like it might, yes, it will work, but it's going to work based on many factors. And some of that might be that there's a better way for something to happen than I could ever lowercase know.
And I like that you bring up the H word, humility. But for me, it's like humility is not this playing small. So I think that there's this assumption that humility is playing small, but humility actually gives birth to awe. So you stand in awe, you stand in amazement of what is in front of you.
Yeah.
And so when you have that mindset of humility, you're always standing in awe. You're always just like, oh my God. And it's like this opening, and it allows things to come in. And I think that that's the same, humility, curiosity, it has kind of the same flavor to it, because both of those things create an opening.
Yeah.
Both of those things create an opening that to just be like, sit in just like the sheer like amazement of everything that's going on. And then we don't have to know the answer. We don't have to know everything, but just to be able to sit and like enjoy it for a minute. Like the constant trying to like see how much stuff we can stuff in our brains. My God, it's okay to like sit down for a minute and be like, wow, let me sit here on this rock and really just take all this in. I don't always have to be like doing something or like, reading something or getting more and more spirit. I mean, it's like, it's not about that. Sometimes we just need to sit and just be like, let me rest here for a minute and see how this feels.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
All right, everybody, thank you for being here. We love your support. We love that you're watching. As Reverend Dan talked about earlier, we have lots of ways that you can join in on the fun. Come talk to us Thursday night. It's a great time at the gathering. And, sign up. Come see us for meditation. That's good too. But now this is the part where we want to talk about ways to support this. If this is something that you believe in, something that you would like to see spread far and wide, there's lots of ways that you can support us in this mission. Of course, donations is the most obvious and the easiest. There's a button right on our website that says donate. It's all tax deductible. So that is absolutely an excellent way to support us. There's more ways to support us too. If you like the message and want to share it around, by all means do. Tell your friends. Send the emails to them. Send the YouTubes. Go to YouTube and find our page. This is one way that you can support us without having to pay a penny. Go subscribe to our YouTube channel and click like, which helps the YouTube algorithm put it in front of more people. So really, it's this philosophy that we love, these ideas that we love for ourselves, and we figure other people out there can use them too. So it's our mission to really get this to the farthest reaches of the planet, and you can help us with that. So by all means, please see and ask yourself what you can do if you'd like to see this further. Really hope you come and join us in conversations on Thursday. Keep your eyes open for what we're calling our weekly celebration of spirit kind of event. It's going to be fun. It's unfolding, evolving as we speak, and we hope to put that out here pretty soon. So just keep your eyes out, sign up for the newsletter, and really ultimately number one is just take care of yourself the best you can, which ripples out to all those around you. So thanks for joining us. We hope to see you soon.